Imagine a hot evening in one of the residential districts on the outskirts of Tehran. Dust hangs in the air, and narrow streets stretch past old warehouses and rusty gates. Among the few passers-by, a woman in loose Muslim clothing stands out, her face covered by a light veil. Beside her is a man in traditional attire, seemingly escorting his sister or wife. They walk slowly, as if without purpose, occasionally exchanging brief words. To any observer, they are just an ordinary couple, nothing remarkable. But in reality, every step she takes is part of a dangerous game. Her eyes, hidden behind the fabric, quickly scan the walls, cameras, and doors. She notices that one particular warehouse has no permanent security, the very warehouse that the Iranian authorities avoided mentioning, even in whispers. Behind its unassuming walls lay something that could shift the balance of power in the Middle East, the heart of a secret nuclear program. No one on these streets could imagine that this woman's walk was just the opening move in one of the most daring operations in history. A clever trick by Israel's Mossad that allowed them to steal the secrets of Iran's atomic project right from under the noses of those who believed they were fully protected. And the way it was done seems almost unbelievable. For Israel, talk about Iran's nuclear weapons is not just a political topic. It's a matter of life and death. Iranian leaders have openly said for years that Israel should not exist. They support armed groups that fight against Israel, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza. So the idea that such an enemy could get a nuclear bomb is seen in Israel as a catastrophe that must be prevented at any cost. In 2015, the world powers and Iran signed the so-called nuclear deal, the JCPOA. Under it, Iran promised to limit its nuclear program, and in exchange, the heavy international sanctions against it would be lifted. In the West, this was presented as a major diplomatic success. But in Israel, there was no celebration. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Mossad chief Yossi Cohen immediately said, "This deal is a mistake." Why? Because it doesn't actually stop Iran from secretly continuing research. On the contrary, it gives them time to calmly prepare for building a bomb once the restrictions expire. Everything changed in January 2017 when Donald Trump came to power in the United States. His team was much tougher on Iran. Israel realized this is the chance. If they could convince Trump that Iran was violating the deal, the U.S. might pull out of the agreement. But words alone wouldn't be enough. The international community was tired of endless accusations and wanted to see hard evidence. And that's when Mossad came up with its plan. They needed proof that couldn't be denied, not satellite images, not rumors from agents, but real documents written by Iranians themselves, complete with stamps, signatures, blueprints, and detailed plans for tests and production. If such material landed on the desks of world leaders, the story of a peaceful program would crumble into dust. Within Israeli intelligence, they understood this wouldn't just be an operation, it would be a game with the highest possible stakes. If it succeeded, Israel could sink the nuclear deal, and Iran would lose its biggest political victory in years. If it failed, the consequences could be disastrous. But there was no choice. For Israel, this was a fight to make sure the region would never see a nuclear bomb aimed at it. In intelligence work, there are two main ways to gather information. The first is HUMINT, human intelligence. These are agents and informants who risk their lives to pass on secrets. The second is SIGINT, intercepted communications, calls, messages, emails. Mossad used both methods. Somewhere deep inside the Iranian government, there were people willing to cooperate. Some did it for money, others for ideological reasons, and some simply because they hated the regime. These sources began whispering about unusual movements. Iran's most secret nuclear documents were being moved to a new location. At the same time, Israeli specialists were intercepting encrypted communications between senior Iranian officials. Piece by piece, the picture became clearer. In February 2016, shortly after the nuclear deal was signed, Iran secretly transferred its entire nuclear archive to an industrial area called Shohrabad in the south of Tehran. Inside an old warehouse stood 32 massive safes. Most importantly, the facility had no round-the-clock security. Among the key figures involved in the move were Energy Minister Reza Ardakanian and the head of the nuclear program, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, a man Israel referred to as the father of the Iranian bomb. Once Mossad learned exactly where Iran's nuclear archive was hidden, the most dangerous and labor-intensive stage began: preparing the operation. There was no room for mistakes. The mission required penetrating the heart of the enemy's capital, breaking into safes, seizing the documents, and disappearing, leaving the Iranians completely in the dark about what had happened. The first step was a reconnaissance mission. A female agent, fluent in Farsi, was sent to Tehran under deep cover. Her cover story was carefully crafted. She looked like an ordinary local woman in traditional Muslim clothing, accompanied by a relative or guardian in traditional male attire. They slowly walked through the dusty streets of the Shohrabad industrial zone, appearing to be just taking a casual stroll. But her true purpose was far more serious: to study the warehouse, check for security presence, and determine whether it was possible to approach the site without arousing suspicion. At the same time, in Israel, a precise replica of the warehouse was built. Using blueprints, photos, and detailed descriptions, they recreated everything, from the gates to the exact placement of the safes. Even the door materials and wall thickness were matched. Agents trained there for weeks, working fast and silently, rehearsing every move and testing their tools. One critical limitation was time. Intelligence indicated that they could operate inside for up to 7 hours, from the moment of entry until dawn, when guard shifts changed and the surrounding area woke up. Any delay could mean failure, arrest, and an international scandal. A crucial decision was made. Instead of merely photographing the documents, they would physically steal them. It sounded insane. Tens of thousands of pages and electronic files had to be moved, but Mossad had a clear logic. Bringing back the originals meant no one in the world could accuse them of forgery. These would be undeniable, tangible proofs they could present to the global community and political leaders. Fewer than 24 people were selected for the mission. The team included both Israeli operatives and Iranian agents working for Mossad. Each knew only their part of the plan. This was a group with no room for chance, only vetted, experienced professionals willing to risk their lives to change the course of history. The night in Tehran's Shohrabad industrial zone was quiet and cool. Thick smog hung low over the streets, and away from the busy roads stood an unremarkable warehouse, looking abandoned. But inside it held the very thing Israel was risking everything for. Exactly at 0001, the operation began. A team of fewer than 24 people, Israeli and Iranian agents, silently approached the warehouse gates. According to intelligence, they had no more than 7 hours before the morning security shift arrived and the area came alive. The first step was disabling the alarm system. The team bypassed it in just a few minutes. They knew exactly which cables to cut and where the control boxes were located. Then came the task of breaking through the heavy steel doors. These doors were not just thick, they were built to withstand serious attempts at forced entry. But the agents used powerful industrial cutters capable of heating up to 3,600 degrees Celsius. The metal melted like wax, leaving jagged, torn edges. Inside, rows of massive safes awaited them. There were 32 in total, each filled with folders, disks, and blueprints, protected not just by locks, but by time itself. Every minute spent meant a higher risk of discovery. The plan had always assumed it would be impossible to open them all. That's why the team knew exactly which 6 to target, the most valuable, containing the key information on Project AMAD and its continuation. The work moved at maximum speed. The cutters roared, the metal cracked, and agents rotated in shifts, pulling out classified folders, stacks of blueprints, flash drives, and disks. By dawn, they had secured around 50,000 paper documents and 55,000 digital files stored on 183 CD-ROMs. A special unit was tasked with transmitting data to Tel Aviv in real time. Anything that could be scanned or copied quickly was sent through encrypted communication channels straight to Mossad headquarters. This was the insurance policy, in case someone from the team was ambushed and some of the documents couldn't be physically extracted. At this point, the operation was going according to plan, but the most dangerous stage still lay ahead, getting out of Tehran before anyone realized what had happened. At 7 a.m., as the winter sun began to rise over Tehran, the security guard at the Shohrabad industrial zone noticed something that was never supposed to happen. The heavy metal gates of the warehouse had been broken open, the locks cut, the doors twisted out of shape. Inside, chaos. Several safes stood wide open, folders scattered across the floor, empty shelves gaping in the dim light. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then, panic. Phone calls began flying. To the local police, to the Ministry of Intelligence, to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Within an hour of discovering the break-in, armed teams were already on the streets. A massive manhunt was launched. Roadblocks were set up, every truck and car was checked, and the search began for even the smallest trace of the stolen documents. But the Mossad agents were already far away. That same night, right after leaving the warehouse, the truck carrying the archive headed toward the border with Azerbaijan. But it wasn't the only truck. The operation used a clever deception. Several decoy trucks left at the same time, each heading in a different direction, pretending to transport something important. These lures were meant to draw the attention of Iranian forces if they started a chase. The main bet was on time. While Iranian intelligence was still figuring out what exactly had been stolen, the most important information was already in Israel. That same night in Tehran, a separate team began scanning and copying the documents, transmitting them in real time via encrypted channels straight to Tel Aviv. Even if the truck had been intercepted, the value of the operation would have been preserved. The digital copies were already in Israeli hands. By the time the archive crossed the border, Tehran was in full ghost hunt mode. None of the agents were caught, and no real truck ended up in Iranian hands. The deception worked perfectly. Mossad vanished as if it had never been there, leaving behind only a pile of empty safes and shock at the highest levels of the Iranian leadership. By the time the morning of January 31st, 2018, turned into day, Tehran was already in full crisis mode. An operation that the Iranian authorities had intended to keep under strict secrecy had become an internal disaster. Armed patrols were stationed at the Shorbad warehouses, and additional checkpoints were set up across the capital and beyond. Everything was being inspected: trucks, minibuses, cars, even motor scooters. Other methods were deployed as well: helicopters with thermal imaging cameras, checks of security footage, and mass questioning of residents in nearby districts. But nothing. It was as if the thieves had vanished into thin air. For Iranian intelligence, this was not just a failure, but a blow to its prestige and reputation. In the following weeks, whispers began to circulate in the corridors of power that the breach had not been caused solely by outside intervention. Later, in 2024, former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad publicly stated something that shocked many. At the very heart of Iranian intelligence, in the unit tasked with protecting the country from Mossad, there was a double agent. Even more stunning, he was the head of that very unit. Ahmadinejad claimed that about 20 Iranian operatives had secretly cooperated with Israel and participated in the theft of the archive. These were not low-level informants, but people with access to the most sensitive information. Official bodies, of course, denied everything. But the fact remained. Iran was unable to recover the stolen materials, and the revelation that Mossad had penetrated the highest ranks of its intelligence was both humiliating and dangerous, a clear sign that someone in their midst had long been working for the enemy. When Israeli specialists began analyzing the stolen materials, they uncovered something that even veteran intelligence officers recognized as a world-class sensation. Most of the documents dated from 1999 to 2003, a period when Iran was officially claiming its nuclear program was purely peaceful. But inside those folders and disks lay an entirely different reality. There were detailed blueprints for nuclear warheads, diagrams of explosive devices, and results of high-powered detonation tests. Some pages contained calculations for placing a nuclear charge inside a warhead. Others showed photographs and schematics of the underground Fordo facility, built to enrich uranium under conditions of total secrecy. Particularly striking were the documents discussing a strategy to divide the program into two parts: an open, civilian section for international inspectors and a hidden, military section for weapons development. This setup was designed to allow Iran to officially appear transparent while secretly continuing its march toward nuclear capability. Perhaps the most dangerous revelation was that these plans included the names of the country's top leadership. Among them were future President Hassan Rouhani, the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, and the elite Quds Force. These findings didn't just confirm that Iran had pursued military nuclear development. They showed that the program was backed by the nation's political and military elite, meaning the entire world had been misled for years. When the first data from the archive was analyzed in Israel, it was immediately shared with allies. But Mossad's statement alone was not enough. International verification was needed to convince the world that the documents were genuine and not carefully fabricated propaganda. The International Atomic Energy Agency gained access to the materials and began its own examination. Soon, Western intelligence agencies, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, joined the verification process. Each of these countries sent its own specialists, nuclear physicists, engineers, and intelligence analysts, to conduct an independent review. The process was meticulous. They checked not only the content, but also the physical characteristics of the documents: paper aging, signatures, stamps, archival codes, and digital file metadata. The conclusion was clear. Everything was authentic. Soon, leading global media outlets began to report on it. The New York Times carried out its own investigation and reached the same conclusion. For many years, Iran had been running a military nuclear program while hiding it from international inspectors. For Israel, this was a diplomatic triumph. They now had not just words, but undeniable evidence, recognized by the world's leading powers and reputable experts. This meant that the next step, persuading the United States to withdraw from the nuclear deal, became much more attainable. On April 30, 2018, in Jerusalem, a moment took place that, within hours, spread across the globe. Under the glare of television cameras, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stepped onto the stage. Behind him, on a large screen, appeared photos and diagrams, while in front of him stood shelves lined with dozens of black binders and boxes of disks. This was the Iranian nuclear archive. Netanyahu spoke with confidence and passion. He claimed that these documents were undeniable proof that Iran had lied for years, continuing a secret military nuclear program. He showed warhead blueprints, underground facility plans, and photos of explosive tests. Every word was calculated for impact, both inside Israel and internationally, and the effect was immediate. Just days later, U.S. President Donald Trump announced that America was withdrawing from the JCPOA nuclear deal. This was precisely what the Israeli leadership had aimed for from the very beginning of the operation. Israel did not stop at the public display. The archive was shared with the intelligence services of key countries: Germany, France, the United Kingdom, as well as Russia, India, Australia, and, of course, the United States. Each of these nations had the opportunity to verify the authenticity and scale of the data. Thus, the Mossad operation in Tehran became not just an intelligence triumph, but a powerful political tool that influenced international relations and shifted the balance of power in the Middle East. The operation to steal Iran's nuclear archive was not just a successful intelligence mission for Israel. It reshaped the strategic landscape of the Middle East. First, it significantly increased Iran's international isolation. The released documents revealed that Tehran had been running a military nuclear program for years, despite its public claims of peaceful intentions. For many countries, even those skeptical of Israel, this became a strong argument for tightening oversight and sanctions. Second, the success served as a demonstration of Mossad's capabilities. The agency proved it could carry out an extremely complex mission in the heart of a hostile state, bypass security systems, smuggle out half a ton of documents, and escape without losses. For allies, it was proof of the Israeli intelligence service's effectiveness. For adversaries, it was a chilling warning. Third, the operation became part of a broader strategy, preparing for a possible military strike should Iran approach the nuclear threshold. Israel made it clear that it is ready to act alone, without waiting for international consensus. Finally, the theft of the archive was closely linked to other covert operations. Among them were sabotage at the Natanz facility in 2020, which crippled key uranium enrichment capabilities, and the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh in November 2020, the man Israel called the father of Iran's nuclear bomb. All these actions form a single picture. Israel is waging a long, multi-layered campaign whose goal is to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons, no matter the cost. For Israel, the theft of Iran's nuclear archive was not just an outstanding intelligence victory. It was a strategic act of self-preservation, meticulously planned and executed with surgical precision. In a world where Israel's adversaries openly speak of its destruction, every such operation is not only a matter of politics, but of survival. This story reveals a simple but harsh truth. In intelligence work, true victories are rarely visible right away. They happen in the shadows, without fanfare or bold headlines, yet their consequences can shift the international balance of power, influence decisions by world leaders, and determine the fate of entire regions. And perhaps that is why this operation will remain in the textbooks, as an example of how one brilliantly planned mission can reshape geopolitical reality. From the day the woman in a hijab walked past an unremarkable warehouse on the outskirts of Tehran, the operation began, an operation that changed the course of Middle Eastern politics. Now, a question for you. Do you think Mossad's strike was enough to halt Iran's nuclear program for a long time? Or was it just a delay of the inevitable? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.